everyone. Welcome to another geeky, I'm not sure what day of the week we're doing this one on. Monday. If you're watching this on replay, it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday or Sunday.
Could be any day.
Yeah, we'll go with that. So welcome to my esteemed colleagues. They're going to introduce themselves to you in a moment. But today's session is all about the power of storytelling in sales. And we know that storytelling is very important and it has more value, more weight over statistics. Although I am going to give you some statistics today because why not? It wouldn't be me if I didn't do that. But hopefully we're going to give you some tips, some ideas, some concepts and some things to think about in your day-to-day sales life around how you think about storytelling and how you weave that into your general world. And hopefully that might make you a little bit more successful out in the field, whatever it is you're doing in the world of sales. So with that in mind, let me introduce the audience. In fact, I'll let them introduce themselves. And I think, Graham, you can go first. Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and why you're passionate about storytelling.
I am Graham Murray, as it says below. I work across Merseyside and Lancashire as a Sales Geek franchisee. I love the power of storytelling. I'm looking forward to getting into this today.
Lovely. Darren.
Yes.
Tell us about you.
Once upon a time.
Let's start there.
Hello, everybody. My name's Darren Neal. I work in the Sales Geek heartland of Lancashire alongside Graham. So Graham and I cover sort of Lancashire, the whole of the Lancashire region between us. I love storytelling because it's all about psychology. And if you can master storytelling and the sort of entry level degrees of psychology in sales, you've won a lot of battles there. So I love storytelling. I love the psychology around sales and looking forward to getting stuck into this today.
Beautiful. And finally, Matt.
Brilliant. So yeah, I work supporting Mr. Mercado on Team Manchester. I focus predominantly around mentorship and training. And I think the thing that we talk about when it comes to storytelling is because we are told stories for the longest time growing up, it's a really simple structure that we can use throughout all of our communication styles. And it doesn't have to be something that you have to remember exactly. The more that you do it, the more that you can tweak it and tailor it dependent on the client's needs. So it's a really powerful tool that is easily adaptable when it comes to, building that relationship with the customer and getting them to remember things.
Yep. Very good. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm James and I'm the COO for Sales Geek. And apologies for my background and where I am at the moment. I'm actually working from home today because it's half term here in the UK. And I need to nip out as soon as I've done this one session today. So it is what it is. We're all going as we can go. So storytelling today. Let me pose a question for the three of you. Jump in, all of you, one of you, whatever it is you want to do. What is storytelling in sales?
I think
it's not
it provides a context, doesn't it? So if we go back to what we learned when we were kids, so if we just provide facts, which the example I usually give is 3 beds, 3 chairs of varying sizes, 3 bowls of porridge, and 3 bears, then that doesn't really give anything exciting to remember. But we all remember that's Goldilocks from when we were kids because there was a story around it. So if we can tie those stories rather than just giving facts across, then it's much more engaging. And I'm sure you've got a couple of stats of how memorable that might be, James.
I might have. Yep. So you're absolutely right. There's a couple of things in there where you just give the binary nature of that. And will we remember it? Some of us remember it for a while. Most of us will forget it after a pretty short time. But if you weave that into a narrative, and we'll come to the narrative at the moment and the power of that, it's an odd question we've never asked ourselves is why do you remember Goldilocks and the 3 bears? It's like any of the stories. Why did you remember it? Why did you remember any of them? Who else wants to go? And we'll dive into some of that stuff.
The reason we remember it is because you've got an audio, visual, and kinesthetic reason for retaining that information. The emotional brain is giving you reasons to retain that information. And here's a stat for you: 92% of all decisions are made by the emotional brain, by the limbic system. So unless we appeal to that emotional brain, to the limbic system, when we're applying storytelling in sales, the chances of your prospect or your client retaining that information over a long period of time is dramatically reduced.
Yeah.
So you have to trigger the emotional responses from your prospects and from your clients when you are telling the story of your business, yourself, your products, your own customers through testimonials and case studies. And all these reasons are triggered and designed to apply and target the limbic system, the emotional brain, the reasons why we retain that information. And that's all audio, visual, and kinesthetic. And it's an art. It's an art that we practice and preach at Sales Geek. And it's an art that we practice and embed with the clients that we work with.
I think you mentioned testimonials and case studies. The real art of storytelling is making it about the person that you sat in front of, isn't it? So marketing often produce shiny brochures with case studies and testimonials on. But if we can make the main character in the story someone who looks like our customer and us, and we weave that into something that makes them go, right, that's my situation, that situation I'm in, that's the outcome I want, then it's much more powerful, isn't it? I've got a saying that if you spend much time in a room with me, I'll often say, which is, it's all about them. And even when you're talking about us, it should still be about them. So if we can make our stories not about our background or our situation, but about the customers who sat in front of us or one that relates to their world, then they're much more likely to engage and remember it.
Yeah,
I suppose as well, it comes into like what are the story beats of the story that you're telling when it comes to your case study and whatnot. It's been a topic that's come up with in a numerous number of training sessions I've been running, where what do you sell versus what do your customers buy from you? And, you know, for example, nobody wants, and apologies for any marketeers watching, nobody wants to buy marketing. They want more leads. Even with what we do, nobody wants training. They want better quality conversations, bigger pipelines, and more deals closed. And I think one of the key things when it comes to telling your stories is remembering that, because a lot of times we'll sort of design a story, look at what are the key features on the website, and then talk about them. Whereas again, it's got to be the same, you know, however you talk about what you do, it's still got to be what are the outcomes, what are people getting? Just so happens to be that, you know, the underlying current is what you do, not the focal point.
Yeah. So in good storytelling, if we talk about what we teach and how we do what we do, there's a few component parts, and I'm going to use some language that feels a bit fluffy, but for the purposes of trying to get this across, everyone's just going to have to work with it and make no apologies. But central to your storytelling conversation, you've got to have a hero, right? I don't like using hero statements because they're a little bit, they're a bit old, but there's a central focus. We'll call it that. There's a central focus, and that could be an individual, that could be a challenge, that could be an experience, that could be a business, could be a whatever. But there is always a central focus. And what we're trying to do with storytelling, I think, is weave a narrative that takes that central focus on a journey. Now, the more you can make that central focus related to the individual you're talking to, the better. You can't always do that, but the more it is impactful to that individual. And we're going to talk some things about psychology again in a moment, and do some stuff that Graham loves a lot around DISC and things about how we communicate in a better methodology. But first and foremost to a great story is you have to have a central focus. And the more you can make that central focus about an individual or an individual's experience, you're on the right track. At that point, you have to generate conflict. Now, I don't mean generate conflict that the central focus or the hero of that story has, but there is an adjutant in there. Because if everything was always okay, if everything feels all right, is experienced to be okay, then the story might not be a bad one, but it might not have the impact. And bearing in mind, we're talking about storytelling and sales. So you have to generate where does the conflict, where does the adjutant live? And is that against the individual? Is that something they're experiencing, something somebody else experiencing, etc.? And that brings us back to that need cycle, isn't it? We talk a lot about what need is. Good, top tips, right? Remember, need is always a triangle. There's three elements to need. There's what we need, there's what we want, and there's what we desire. And you have to weave the navigation point between those three elements to create where the adjutant lives. And what I want is not always what I need, and what I need is not always what I desire. But between the three of them, I get to where I want to try and get to. And I think, Matt, what you was explaining there, it's that outcome, right? We know the outcome we're trying to achieve. So build your focus point, build your point of adjutant, and then you've got to create the emotional journey. So what journey are you taking them on, and what emotional beat notes are you creating? And the key thing to good storytelling is never to create too many beat notes, because it becomes a confusing story. But what are the core landing ones? And to emphasize both sides of how our brains work, and we're going to come to some brain theory. You guys know your brain theory in a second. But you've got to hit the logical side of our brain, how we think about things, about how we feel about things. And as you land those stories, you're trying to navigate your way through both of those journeys in conjunction with, need, wants, and desires, etc. And the last two big things, a clear resolution, the call to action, the how someone navigated their way out of that adjutant, that conflict. And that can often be CTAs, call to actions, those sorts of things. But you're showing ultimately at the end of the day that there was a central figure, person, issue, company, challenge, whatever, that went on a journey, that found themselves an adjutant, a negative in some way. They understood what they were trying to get out of it. You painted the end goal picture, and there was a call to action that demonstrated to someone you can go from here to here, and it's not that hard. And the most important part about sales storytelling in sales, got to keep it simple. I might not have made that too simple, but anyway, they're the structural landing points. Go on, sorry.
I think one of the things you mentioned around the adjutant, as you said it, the problem.
Yes.
Like, it's one of the things that when I'm coaching and training teams, I talk about something called problem tiering.
Yeah.
And because all too often, right, we again, you talk about your adjutant, your problem, and your story. That can be something that can tailor and change dependent on the level that you're talking about. Again, whether we're talking someone who's above the line of authority or below the line of authority. And I break it down into operation problem, manager problem, like head of department, and then your business problem. Like, take something, for example, say there's a client that I was doing some work with, saving time on reporting. So running the reports, this, that, and the other. The operation problem is how long it's currently taking them to run that report using the competitor's software. But if you go to an MD and tell him that story, again, bit of a broad stroke and a generalization, is the MD is not really going to be concerned about how long it takes or how difficult it is for them to run that report. But then if you ask that question, well, so what? Well, if it's taking them too long to run that report, well, so what? Well, okay, well, it impacts production quota. Okay, well, then keep going, so what, so what, so what? You then get to a business level problem where it's all around throughput and capacity and, hitting the, profitability turnover goals. And when you're telling your story, you can tweak your problem dependent on the level you are talking to. Again, someone who is at an operation level, is profitability going to be something that's a driver for them? Possibly not. But equally, someone who's at the very top, an operation problem, is that really going to be, again, a driver, a motivator for change for them? So when it comes to telling your stories, tailoring the problem, the challenge to the person you're talking to, I think is really, really important, because it needs to resonate with them.
Can I ask the three of you a quick question? Is there any frameworks or, again, salesy rubbish here, but methodologies or things that you can have as a mind map that help people remember storytelling frameworks to get to the bottom of those stuff?
Nothing that springs to mind other than that the outcome, you always need to be heading towards the outcome that customer wants. Yeah. So it's not about the story, it's about the outcome that they're heading towards, or you're working them towards. Darren, you're poised.
I am a little bit. I talk about, when you're talking about storytelling, you alluded to it a little bit a while ago, James, in mentioning the hero. With any story, and anybody that's familiar with the drama triangle will know this, you've got the hero, the victim, and the villain. And those are the three elements of a story that you have to build in. Now, the victim will be ultimately somebody that your client is trying to sell to. And the hero will be the client. I'm talking about how we coach our clients to use storytelling in their businesses. So the hero will be the client, the victim will be who they're trying to sell to, and the villain will be a problem that their client is experiencing. And that could be the competition, it could be something in terms of revenue losses, it could be conversion rates, it could be all sorts of things around why a particular element in their business is not functioning properly. And whether that's leads or higher gross profit or whatever it might be, there always has to be a hero, a victim, and a villain in any three areas of a story. And if you think about any story that we've ever heard, you talking about the Goldilocks and all the rest of it earlier on, there's always a victim, a hero, and a villain. And since the beginning of time, since we've been telling stories around campfires to each other, those three elements have coexisted and have to coexist in order for the story to make sense. So when you're mapping out that story, whether we're telling it as selling ourselves to a client or whether we're coaching our client to sell their products and services to their client, there has to be a hero, victim, and a villain. And if you avatar that through into various different scenarios and circumstances, ordinarily you've got a framework that is allowing you to tell a story from the beginning, the current, and then the after. And if you can map that through, then you've got it cracked.
What's the it's a good one, I like that. What's the I don't know what I was asking there. Oh yeah, no, I was going to say the emotional side is, do you feel, and I've seen this and asked a few times with salespeople, there is a danger, isn't there, that salespeople can leverage storytelling evokes emotion. And do you feel a danger that some people can tread a line between positive emotion and negative emotion, right? We get into scare tactics, right? Because that's where old school storytelling came from, wasn't it? You know, I remember, I'll give you a quick story about once I had a very short job when I first left the Navy, and I was still working out what I was going to do and working out how to do sales and all the rest of it. I got a job for an alarm company, the on houses alarm systems and stuff. And when they were doing their sales training, part of their sales training was around storytelling. I'd never seen and experienced that before. And I thought, well, this is really good. And then they gave me a book of images, which I was supposed to show people. So I'd go door to door, knocking on, buy a house alarm and all the rest of it. And then they gave me a book that I'd sit down and say, do you want your house to look like this? And you had to go through the book and open the pictures up. And it was a house that had been burgled, right? And then one of the pictures had bloodstains on the wall. You're like, and I'm supposed to say to them, do you want this to be you? I didn't use the book, if I'm honest with you. But is there a line, is what I'm trying to get to. Is there a line? How do you manage not crossing it?
I think it goes into manipulation.
Yeah.
Really?
I think if you're establishing trust,
you're
doing that through authenticity. So if you're showing horrendous pictures, I'm not sure that's going to work. I used to work in the wonderful world of compliance, and you could use, or you'll go to prison if you don't do anything, or someone could die if you don't do anything, and that's not a way to sell anything. So it's authenticity, it's trust, it's creating emotion, but not anger.
Yeah.
We don't want to start catastrophizing.
Yeah.
Ooh,
There's a lot of that in the world right now today, isn't there? And I know we said before we started this call, we're going to stay away from politics. We're not going to involve any of that. But
there's a worrying but there, James.
Yeah. No. What I was trying to get to is there's a lot of people that live by a mantra. I know Rich does, and I've started to, which says, don't watch the news, don't watch social media, because it's so filled of negativity, isn't it? And even people trying to be positive and negative in their sentiment. And I've stopped watching the news. I don't listen to it anymore. I don't watch it anymore. There's a couple of, because I feel if there's something important enough that I need to know, someone's going to tell it to me, right? They're going to say, this happened, you ought to know about it, and I'm going to find out. But I tend to not bother because everything just seems negative. The atmosphere at the moment feels agitative. There's an adjutant in the air, isn't there, at the moment? And therefore, weaving that around and talking to clients, I've noticed it that there is from clients talking to us when they're telling their story of their world, how negative it is over and above what normal negativity often is. So it's an easy trap to fall into, isn't it? And you're right. You've got to be the ultimate professional. You have to be able to bring balanced viewpoint. And I think in storytelling, that's the critical element, a balanced viewpoint. How do we generate a balanced viewpoint between parties involved?
Yeah, I think you're taking them towards a brighter future rather than talking about a negative one, aren't you? I think that something that sprung to mind when I was thinking about this webinar today was Matt won't remember it, but the Bisto adverts from the 1980s.
He's too young.
Yeah, they didn't list the ingredients of Bisto, did they? They gave us this family situation that somehow got us all engaged in where they were going and emotionally kind of charged to want to know what happens in a stranger family's life.
And how many of us had a crush on the woman?
I'm gonna have to Google this advert now.
Yeah, she was amazing. I forget what her name is now, but she was amazing.
It's very clean, Matt. You'll be fine to Google it.
Yeah, if you find to Google that one, you'll be all right.
Yeah. It's just reminding me of people will forget what you've said, people will forget what you've done, but then never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah. The Bisto one is a great example, isn't it? That advert, that was one of the few instances where the advertising wove a story, not the product. It created an emotion and a feeling that you wanted, that feeling of that homeliness and that dinner, and you wanted to be married to that woman. But that was a different thing.
So
you definitely want that.
Storytelling more of a marketing function than a sales function, then?
I think it's
let's put the cat amongst pigeons.
Sales and marketing are the same thing. We all know that. If anyone thinks they're a different department, they should come and speak to me.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, they're one in the same. What we find though is that are often disjointed in their message, and what marketing thinks it wants to say and how it wants to say it is often different to how sales might want to say things. One of marketing's great powers that it has in industry is to set a scene way ahead of an engagement of something, to get people's mindsets going. You know, think of marketing 101, AIDA model. Do you remember your AIDA models? Yeah. We've got to get our attention and we've got to generate interest. And storytelling is the two parts of that. Sales and other parts get into decision and action and all those sorts of things. But grab attention, create attention, generate interest. And you can do that so much more better with stories than ever you can with facts and figures. There's nothing wrong with facts and figures, by the way. Facts and figures are always essential in the world of sales because they'll back up your data. But story trumps everything else always.
Well, going back to your point, James, about not paying attention to the news because it feels quite toxic and all that sort of stuff. If you sort of try and weave that into the human condition and psychology around storytelling and all the rest of it, we as a species need to have the bad, because if everything was rosy and good all the time, we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves. So we have to have the contrast. There's always light and dark, good and bad, hero, villain, all that sort of stuff. So we have to have that to understand the contrast between what's good and what isn't. So as much as I understand people not wanting to digest too much of the negative, because the narrative around the media is quite toxic and negative most of the time, it should be called bad news, not the news.
Yeah, that's true.
We still need to have the opposite of the good to understand the difference between those two.
Yeah, I get that. Is to understand where you're, if you don't have a counter to where you think you are at the moment, you don't know where better could be. I do understand that. I think from my perception, what I'm sort of more riffing along the lines of is that it's the, what's the term I use when it comes to pricing as well? I talk about this when we do negotiation stuff. We become desensitized to bad news. Mm-hmm. So what is bad becomes a norm, and we accept a new norm. It's like pricing, isn't it? For everyone out there listening or watching to this now, walk down your local high street into your town or whatever it is, and big towns. You might not see this in small towns, but you need to go to big towns and have a look for shop windows that are advertising discounts, right? you'll see 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, right? You'll see it all the time. You see it everywhere. How many of you rush in to buy whatever that thing is? 70% off. You should be having it. It's an amazing deal. Go get 70% off whatever that thing is. I don't know what that thing is. I don't know what the shop is. JD Sports over here does that a lot, right? And they stopped it now because they woke up to it. But for years, that used to be our norms, didn't it? You'd walk down the high street and there'd be massive discount signs. And we as humans became unconsciously biased, desensitized to the impact that it has. So now what was good discounting, probably for reasonable products and services, I don't know, just pass us by because we're like, yeah, no. Same with the bad news story, right? You've got to, you're right. You've got to have a focal point to know where good could be. But if you run, I think we run the risk in industry today and in sales today, that you can become desensitized to what bad is, and therefore it becomes the new norm. And therefore defining what good is becomes more challenging. That's probably where I was going with that. That was very long-winded. Somebody else can chip in.
I get it.
Well, I was just going to talk about, often we work with small businesses and the first hire is always the hardest, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the owner who's been running his business for 10 years thinks I'll bring in a salesperson, teach them about what we do and set them on the way and they'll be as successful as us. But the huge difference between business owner and first salesperson is the lack of stories, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you could transfer all those stories into your new salesperson, they'd be onto a winner. But all they've got is shiny brochure, often some case studies that, you know, they don't know any background to. So they fail very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's how do you educate that into new salespeople and get them to develop their own stories? Because as I mentioned before, if you're telling a story that you've experienced and you're a character in, that's a much more compelling story to a customer than it is about someone you don't know did this in the company before I joined.
There's only a finite, especially for a smaller business, there's only a finite number of problems that your product or service fixes. And if you're, especially if you're going through the first hire process, you should still have a fairly tight ICP because, you know, as you grow, realistically, the number of people you can sell to tends to grow because of your product development, things like that. So there's only I would say there's a finite number of stories to highlight. And I suppose it comes down to when you're training them, it's not necessarily how to say it, but it's what are the story beats. I think it's identify. I suppose what makes it up is identifying right who is the type of customer to tell this story to. What was their situation? What was the challenge? What was it? What was the knock-on effect of that challenge?
Yeah.
And then how do we solve it?
Yeah, I think we cover that a lot.
Journey of, you know, down and then up.
When we're training on objection handling, don't we? In most businesses, there's, you know, top 10 objections that come up all the time.
Yes.
And in most businesses, nobody writes those down. So if you can overcome
That's a million, Graham. That's what we always get told.
Have some fantastic social proof that the company you work for, whether you were involved or not, has solved those problems before, and an engaging story that you can then retell. That's absolutely fantastic for conversion ratios going up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you want some neuroscience stuff?
Please.
We love that, right? We like psychology and we love neuroscience. So just on psychology, I was covering this when we were doing the negotiations skills thing a couple of weeks ago. So there's going to be some hate on this, and there's going to be some heat I'm about to get. It's okay. Show me some comments. I love it all. Right. So there's 10 branches of psychology that everyone should know about. There are 6 that really inform sales psychology, and negotiation. Not covering those today. See another course. Beautiful. Right. But under psychology, there's a coupling of there's a joining effect. So there's under neuroscience. So there's some really good neuroscience studies, some white papers, some really good books that you might want to have a look at, invest some time in as to what neuroscience tells us is the power behind storytelling and why it has an effect. And when we understand, I think, a little bit of the why it has an effect, we become a little bit more articulate about telling the stories. So, and under no particular order. So number one, so if we think about stories and we think about sort of like the fact side of things, when you talk to people about facts, There's nothing wrong with facts. Facts have to be delivered, right? You do have to substantiate anything you're talking about. So facts are right and purposeful, so correctly. However, we as humans, neuroscientifically wise, when we absorb information when it comes to facts, there is a part of our brain that absorbs facts, and it's the language areas of our brain, right? Which is a very finite part of our cognitive computing power. So it's the language side of our world, of our brain power, that computes, understands, translates, and makes an internal dialogue impact as to how facts affects us, right? Storytelling, though, if you tell the same thing through a storytelling element, it affects lots more parts of the brain. So number one, it gets into areas linked with experience, which is a whole part of your brain. It gets linked into parts of your brain around emotion, your chimp brain, all that sort of stuff. And it gets, and most people don't understand this about storytelling, it gets, it kicks off and triggers parts of the brain that are geared around movement. And the reason why it does that is because when you tell a story, we will often visualize the story back with you. And that's something called neurocoupling. So if you're telling a story to someone, and try it out, right? Go have a chat with somebody who might be mildly interested in a similar TV series as you. Well, try it on TV or film or something like that. And then start explaining a TV series or an episode or something. I can bet you, as has been proven through neuroscience, that part of their brain will now be visualizing the same thing that you're now describing. So as you talk about it, they'll be seeing it as you explain it. But in their head, they will be mirroring the movements as well. So as well as the emotional side and the visualization side it's creating a mirroring of how the movement works. And that adds an extra texture and a contextualization to how the story is then perceived and understood in terms of how our brain absorbs that information. So facts are great. Stories wake up a whole new part of the brain. The additional side of things, you get this neurocoupling side of things. So as you describe that story, we instantly start to visualize it. And we visualize it in two ways. We visualize the thing you say, and in sales, we then place ourselves in the situation. And you can do that through some very clever language techniques. And there's some NLP stuff. If you're interested in that, that'll be a whole topic for another day. If you want to get into that side of things, which is see yourself in there and all that sort of stuff. So people can see themselves in it and they create the movement around it as well as the motion. You can also really be very clever with that side of things because you can generate smell, you can generate taste, and you can generate touch. And you can do that through asking questions and then implicating what those things look like. So neurocoupling happens a lot when you do the storytelling side of things. You get some other sort of sides of things. You get the hormone release, right? We're not really going to go into that. It's a little bit more fringe, but there are some common hormones that we all share that when you shed stories or tell stories, there are certain hormones that get released in generalization with that, and you can create positive and negative hormone release. Yeah, it's a bit more fringe. And then the side of the brain, hippocampus or whatever that part of the brain is called, which creates memory. So there's a thing around memory, and there's something called the retention curve. So most of you in sales or sales leadership might have heard of this. So the retention curve is a really simple principle that states in broad brushstrokes that 70% of everything you hear, you'll forget inside 5 hours, right? So that's a memory curve. So you get told something, and over a 5-hour period, you'll forget 70% of everything that's been said. That curve gets steeper if it's purely facts and figures. So I'm more likely to forget it much quicker and much more of it much quicker. And then we can combat the memory curve, or there's sometimes called the forgetting curve and stuff like that. There's different names for these things. So you can combat that by doing two things. Number one, repetition. And there is an algorithm that you can go and read about that says for however many times over what spacing you tell the same thing, if it's facts and figures or a story, reduces the memory curve because you're embedding, and it's the hippocampus that takes that memory side. But if you tell it as a story, you greatly reduce the impact of the memory curve loss. And people are more likely over days, weeks, and even months through study are likely to remember the essence and gist of the story, maybe not the detail or the big beat notes, but they'll remember the sense of feeling you gave them. So there's masses of benefits of being able to do this. And if you do it right, the neuroscience side of things tells you that if you say the right things in the right way, in the right order, you get masses of benefit from it. But the key thing is that visualization, the sensory element that you create. As Matt rightly said, there's only so many things that your product and service can probably fix or solve or do whatever it needs to do. So therefore, probably as a business, as an individual, you have time to weave what you think your stories are, what you think your things will be that will have the greatest impact to people based on what Darren's talked about, the hero, the villain, and the victim. There's stories that you can weave under those structures that will help make that landing much more easier, and then give that to your marketing team, and you can create an entire narrative around it. I went off on one a little bit, and I apologize. I shall rein myself back in, and I shall stop there. If anyone else wants to just throw some
Well, no, it sort of links in a little bit around when you talk about the retention curve is Edgar Dale's like cone of experience.
Yeah.
And it's why, for example, when we talk about, especially when I'm running training sessions, I'm so heavy on, I know people roll their eyes, but role play, practicing, doing. Professional work, professional role play.
Gotcha. Back in the room.
So it's the sort of thing where when we're talking about that retention curve, it's why activity, expression, putting stuff into practice is so key, so people don't forget it 5 hours after the training session. It's because if a training session is just a tick box note-taking exercise, then it's not really training. It's just basically a waste of time, and it's a tick box exercise. But also, a good example is we talk about this, the old Maya Angelou quote, right? People forget what you said, what you did, don't forget how you made them feel. I remember I ran this training session and I asked that same question, and a good example of this is, I said, has anyone ever been to a stand-up comedy show? And then at first, people are sort of thinking, a couple of people put their hands up. And I said, right. I said, when was it? Oh, it was over a decade ago. Oh, can you remember much about it? Yeah. I said, do you remember who was on? Not really. Can you remember any of his jokes? Not really. Well, how did it make you feel? And she gave me such a detailed answer of that experience. She couldn't remember the actor, the comedian's name, apart from the fact that he was awful. Because she had so this is something called high arousal versus low arousal emotions. I don't mean like that, James. But high arousal emotions are emotions that cause a chemical change in the spike in brain activity. And it sticks with us longer if we experience a high arousal emotion. Anger, disgust, fury, awe, things like that. And she described for me in detail where she was sat in the audience, the tone of which he was saying things, and how it made her feel. And it's interesting where when we tie emotion into something, an experience or a story, it stays with us for a lot longer than if she just went, oh, it was all right. Again, people don't remember those sort of things. So when we're talking back to, I suppose, the retention and the story is, I suppose, the difference between fear selling that you mentioned before, James, of do you want your house to look like this? That sort of manipulation tactic from, days gone by. But getting people to empathize and see themselves in the story is so key.
So
because they can see themselves, they put a stronger emotional tie with that person in the story.
How do you get people to tell you a story rather than like what we often do? So we're quite good at telling stories about the things that we can talk about and all the rest of it. How do you get a client to elaborate their story to us?
So that just comes for me is ask a question the answer. And asking those follow-on questions of, so for example, there may be hints on a problem. And it's like, oh, well, what was the knock-on effect of that? Well, how did it make you feel? Who else did it impact? You've almost got to pull the story out of them. Because especially if they're a trained buyer, they're going to be very, very shut off. For me, it comes down to just asking the right questions and just pulling it out of them in a way where it gets them to think about effectively the knock-on effects.
So let's give everyone some top tips then, shall we? What top tips would you give to start to think about, or let's just go in general around storytelling, about how to think about getting them, because you're right, to tell their story more. The more that someone feels their own personal pain or somebody else is around them and it's more empathetic and they tell a story around it, the more impactful your engagement is likely to be. Those statistics around those sorts of things. But give some top tips between the three of you of how you draw some of that out. You mentioned one there, Matty, about question and then question the answer, etc. What else do we do? What else some of the people can think about? Go on, Graham.
I think you mentioned my favourite subject earlier on.
I did. That's what I was leading it in there. Did you see what it's almost like a shovel in there?
And the reason I've got such an exciting background is because I'm at customers today, and earlier on I was with a sales guy who is very detail focused, and he was selling in a very detailed focused way. So we discussed how we need to put that detail into some kind of story in order that it engages someone who is not so detailed, because he might, hopefully if he's watching this, I'm not judging him, he might have just carried on like throwing details and more details until they got bored enough to disappear. Whereas if we weave those details into a story, then it engages people who are of a different behavioral profile, more of a yellow or a high I, if we go into that kind of language.
So you're using the language of colour spectrum there. Some people will be going, what? Just explain it for everybody.
Thanks, James. Well, red are people who want to get things done quickly, not necessarily interested in the detail. Blue, people who love the detail. Yellow are the ones that really love the story, get excited by the whole world, and looking for shiny new toys constantly. Darren, James. And greens are the steadier people in life who are looking for more people-focused elements to it. Is that a fair summary for you, James?
It is a fair summary. So I think what Graham's leading to there is, when you think about telling stories, you should be conscious at a sales room, but this is all about sales, right? So as a salesperson, a discipline you should become very masterful at is around understanding psychometric profiles. There's lots of them out there. There's loads of stuff you can understand, and loads of them are very good. Some of them are not so great. Some of them are very complex, but are really generalistic ones. Something that's very easy to consume, very easy to understand, very easy for you to navigate your way around is a psychometric profile called DISC, D-I-S-C. You might have heard of it. Go Google it. Go find out about this stuff. But there are 3 books I am now about to recommend to you. You should have in your lexicon. Is that a thing? Is it a lexicon? Or is that a car? I'm not sure.
Let's go library.
It's a word.
Library. Go with library. It's not a car. Is it a car? No, lexicon. I don't know. Whatever that is. In your library. So there's 3 really good books. These guys have all got those books. I've got those book as well. And we would advocate this to anyone. So you want a book called Surrounded by Idiots, Surrounded by Bad Leaders, and Surrounded by Psychopaths. So get those 3 books and read them. They will really have a meaningful impact into your life when it comes to understanding the psychometric profiles. Make it really easy for yourself. Matt's now going to show the books, right? You're going to put.
I realised I've lent them out to another client.
Oh yeah, that old chestnut. Right. In that case, now I'm going to have to trump you and put it up. I'll stop talking first, and then I'll do it.
Shelf, mate.
Anyway, I'll put my 3 up in a second. So they'll give you good context, but what it gives you context to is behaviour. So there's lots of different psychometric profiles, but behavior is a really important one to try and understand, especially under psychology. When it comes to telling a story, weaving a narrative, dragging a narrative from someone, their behavioral model gives you insights into, 1, how to weave the landing points of your story. As Graham rightly says, those people that have a higher red personality are very interested in one version or one take of that story, whereas a blue personality, it's the same story, but they'll be more interested in slightly different beat notes, for example. It's the same thing when drawing it back out of them. If you recognize the type of personality you think you might be talking to, there is a very specific ways that you can ask and generate and elicit the information that you're after. And great salespeople will mirror who you're working with. So if you are a natural S, for example, 69% of the globe's population are an S. If you're ever interested in that sort of thing, it's collated in those books. So if 69% of the world's population are an S, the chances are you're going to meet one, right? Now, that's okay. So, but an S and an S talking to each other doesn't mean that they don't get anything done, but it has a very specific outcome generated to it. S is a high green, which is an S, and a red personality. There's a natural tendency for a little bit of misunderstanding. Is it fair to say? There's a little bit of butting of heads there. And a high I, yellow, and a high blue, same thing again. Eyes are all that future thinking, that blue sky, where's the outcome, show me the future, etc. Whereas the blues are a little bit more about the down to earth, give me the data to give you the information. And if the two are not synced in their understanding, you can miss what the story is about. So psychometric profiling and understanding yourself, number one, and then doing your best to understand others, number two, coupled with how you weave your story to get the best about how you say something to versus how you want them to tell it to you. That is the art of what you're trying to achieve. Again, another ramble.
Can I just coming back to your point earlier about how do you draw a story out of your prospect or your client, the people that you are ultimately attempting to sell to. I always refer back to Neil Rackman's spin selling and talk through their current situation and then what problems and challenges. So talk to me, Mr. Customer, about your current situation. Give me the landscape, how you see it right now, and then they'll give you, you can direct it a little bit if you want to. Go back 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. It doesn't really matter, or even in the last month if there's something happened. And then what is the current problem and challenges that you're facing, and what does that mean in terms of what does that mean to your business? What's the implication to your business? Therefore, what do you need? And then when you are relaying a story back to them, you're paraphrasing what they just told you. But instead of implication, you're talking about implementation. Yeah. The implementation from our perspective in what we're going to do to satisfy the need that you've got. So you're mirroring two stories alongside each other. And if it may seem very simple, but this spin methodology that Neil Rackman did, the spin selling book that he wrote, is absolutely still relevant to this day. Yeah. And if you weave that into storytelling and pull the story out of your client or out of your prospects by using that methodology, that works really well.
I totally agree. Sorry. No. Oh, sorry.
You go.
You go first.
Go on, Matt. I've spoken a lot. Go
on. It was actually to follow on from Darren's point, actually, where it's one of the techniques, but it's highly contextual, dependent on what the customer has said, and it's emotional. It's a technique called emotional labeling. So if anyone's ever read Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss, highly recommend it. But a way to encourage somebody to share more is dependent on how they're talking about the situation. Yeah. I can imagine that's been incredibly frustrating for you. And you leave it.
Yeah.
And what you do by using this emotional labeling technique, you give someone an incredibly powerful feeling where they feel seen and they feel validated.
Yeah.
If I got Graham, Graham, thanks for sharing that so far. I mean, I imagine that's been incredibly frustrating for you.
It has, Matt. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, exactly. And and it naturally encourages a lead on. And then I just go, well, look, Graham, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. All I've done is I've validated Graham's emotion and I've made him as a person feel seen, which is such a powerful technique.
Yeah.
Context is, though, I've got to be able to read an emotion.
Yeah.
For example, Graham's all happy clappy. Oh, man, that's been very frustrating for you. What?
You don't know Graham very well.
Way off. Yeah, no, exactly. Now you don't have to be on the money. You don't have to be absolutely laser pointed on the exact emotion Graham is feeling, but you've got to be somewhere in the ballpark. But it can be a really good technique to encourage that person to volunteer more information.
I agree. Sorry, I want to just grab something that you were saying there just quickly. There is a piece in storytelling and questioning in general, which is very, very powerful and often not used enough. And that's the power of silence. We talk about it in negotiation all the time, talk about negotiation training. But just in general questioning and storytelling, the power of silence is brilliant. When someone tells you something and then you just sit there and go, and just cross your arms, you look at them and go. I had a really good one the other day, actually, with a client that I'm currently working with to do some stuff. And they elaborated some of the challenge that they've got right now. And I just sat there across my arms and made a bit of a face. And it was silent, not long, for about 10, 15 seconds. And then they just said, your silence tells me everything I need to know. I haven't told them a thing. I haven't said a thing. They just said, your silence tells me everything I need to know. And I'm like, now what are you going to do about it? And then we went into a self-evolving, sort the problem out sort of thing, but that came from me just not saying a word. You got to do that.
I think it's really powerful though, isn't it? It's not just about us telling stories, it's trying to pull out the story, because I'm a great believer that you spend your whole life training for the point you're at now. So, yes. Me working in pubs 30 years ago was part of what's made me into the salesperson I am today. The kind of science background I had brings the logic that you guys love so much. It all adds to your story to today, doesn't it? So if you can pull out a customer's backstory, then it can tell you a whole lot of how to approach them.
Yeah.
It's also something that you mentioned there, James, where when they said, your silence tells me everything I need to know. One of the things that we can trip ourselves up on is our tonality and our pace when storytelling, where if we aren't switched on and we're not paying attention to how the other person is receiving us, sometimes we just don't put the effort in.
Mm.
Oh,
yeah. When it comes to storytelling,
and if we don't put the effort in, you then control how you interpret me.
Yeah, that's true.
I've got to put the effort into how I am interpreted.
There's the 3 T's to remember when doing storytelling. 3 T's: tone, tact, and tenacity. Tone of your voice, the tack you take, and the tenacity by which you chase the story or tell the story, whichever the case may be. Just very quickly, and then what I want to do is finish on a bunch of top tips for everyone to give. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on Darren's spin model. So we love Neil Rackman. So he went off to do, what was it, Huthwaite? Is that what he went off to do? He created Huthwaite, didn't he? So Spin Selling is still a great book. And the reason why you should understand it is a lot of people have it in their lexicon, library, I don't know, whatever it is, I like that word. Or they might be driving it, I don't know. So Spin is a good model. Most people forget how to use it, right? It's always brought out into 2 core parts, S&P and I and N. Situation, problem creates implied need. The implication, the need, and its associated payoff creates an explicit need. Most people forget those 2 elements. It's a psychological model. Make sure you do it. So we at Sales Geek have a slightly more elaborate model, which builds into our storytelling technique. And I'm happy to share it with you. I'm happy to give it to you. So we call it a specifics model. So being more specific, it's a bit more elongated, but it's a framework. And if anyone wants it, reach out to us and I'll happily share it with you. So specifics, spell the word out, specifics, on a piece of paper, and it runs like this. So it's a little bit spin, but a little bit more longer than spin if you like. So S is the situation, right? So what situation are we in? You can be a little bit more clever with your language and use it as context, because the moment you're using situation, it's a much used word. Give us context. Context provides framework. And that's why you use either the word situation or context, because you're trying to create a framework, a box, by which to control the conversation. Because as you know, and I know, many conversations can go off into tangents. And before you know it, you're chasing rabbits down foxholes, and you're going off all over the place. And you need the situational context to bring it back into. So S is your situation. P is still the same thing. What's the problem? What's the challenge? What's the issue? Use your narrative. So that's the same part of spin, S and P. Give me the context, give me the challenge, give me the issue. Then ours goes off a little bit longer. So now you have the E, SPE, and that's evidence. Tell me how you know. Show me why that's a thing. Because one of the things we often get in sales when people give you issues and challenges, or they tell you the problems, is there is a surprising lack of evidence behind it. It's often feeling generated. It's emotionally and very emotive. I sense this because. One of the things you always want to try and do is check and balance where the evidence is. How do you know? What have you seen? How does it demonstrate itself? It's often a really interesting question. So situation, problem, evidence gives you your first C, and that is the consequence. So how do we then get the consequence of that? Well, who's it involving? And that's a people equation. Where's the consequence to all these things happening? Once we've got a consequence, we can define an impact. Now, the impact has a finite stop. It's the end point. You can futurize that out a little bit if you like. So you've got your situation, you've got your problem, you've got your evidence, you've got your consequence, which leads us to impact. And at that point, within the specifics model, we take a natural breather and we'd paraphrase back at this point, and we'd say, right, the story you're telling me then is this. We paraphrase ourselves back, we get understanding, we're still on the same page, and then we can get the FICS into it. So this is a bit salesy, but it does work, right? It really does work. I've used it so many times, including to this lead client I've just acquired at the moment. So I say to them, right, blue sky thinking, all that sort of great stuff. Know your behavioral model, right? So if you think you're dealing with I and S, blue sky modeling works. If you're dealing with a C and S, if you're doing D and an I, that will work. If you're dealing with an S and a C, you're going to bring that into a little bit more of planning. But if I had to blue sky it a little bit, blank sheet of paper, you've got the A4, I'll give you the pen, and you could write yourself a future state. What are you writing? Then we can do what Matty's just been talking about earlier, which is question the answer the question, and we can go that circular manner, okay? But we want them to create and paint the picture, visualize it, write it down, tell me all the bits about it. And it's normally in this model that we then create an A/B model, your good old marketing stuff of alpha beta testing, etc. So we could say they've written an option as their answer, and then we can paraphrase that back based on everything you just said. Second paraphrase again, you want this as your future model. Question, re-question, reset. This gives you the opportunity to put in your curveball, your option. So that's really interesting. You go down that road there. What about insert second thing? And away you go. Now you've got a choice to make. So we're at SPI, SPECIFI, right? Now you've got the C and S. So now the client's got to make a bit of a choice. They're going to go down their future vision road because they wrote it out, or they like your curveball. At that point, we come to the last C, which is a constraint. So what's stopping you getting that future vision, whatever that future vision is, whether they went A or B? Now you're going to draw out all the constraints. And then the last bit, which is S. So what's the solution that either you, myself, or others need to put in place that removes the constraints, that gives you A or B, insert that mitigates the impacts, that removes the constraints, that eradicates the evidence, that fixes your problem in the context of the conversation we've just had. And you can reverse engineer an entire psychological model that helps also weave a story. So there you go. There's my top tip. I'm going to stop up there. Anyone else got top tips?
Yeah,
top 1 million.
Yeah, that was a top chapter.
Have you used a lexicon?
But building it back to the story.
I want one in blue.
His library, lexicon, library.
I think for me, one of the top tips that I always embed with the people that I'm working with is lead with emotion, but finish with logic. So you draw somebody in terms of creating and setting the scene and using the emotional skills and tools and tips and tricks at your disposal to build that emotional story. But you have to finish it with logic in terms of what is the impact? What does it mean for you, negatively or positively? Because without the evidence, it's just a story. So you have to present the evidence alongside the emotion. So the evidence is the outcome, the desired outcome, which is what you were just talking about, James. So lead with emotion, but finish with logic to give people the biggest picture possible.
Very good. Thank you.
I think I'm going to refer back to something we talked about earlier. If people are going to take away an action from this, is to note down the top 10 objections that they've got in their business that they face and look at what social proof they've got to overcome those objections. Because it'll all be in there within a sales team. They just need to share the ideas between them and help each other to overcome the objections. Because social proof is better than just someone saying it will help.
Yeah,
you want someone else to say it helped me.
And that's where the big part of stories come from, isn't it? The social proof. That is your big stories. Telling their story is the big part. Go on, Matt.
It is, because it gets the point across without arrogance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Matt, you were poised.
Yeah,
no,
go on.
I was just thinking because it's a common whether it's an implied objection or it's explicit, where a lot of clients think that they're unique.
Yeah.
But our industry is different.
Yeah.
And I suppose part of this is you don't want to come across false where you go, well, you know what? I've had a client in the exact same situation where all of a sudden, the underwater basket weavers kind of, niche. I suppose actually, from your guys' point of view, I'd be keen to hear then, what's your take on that? Where when we're about telling stories and the customer goes, it's just different in our industry. It's different selling to the education sector or, high net worth individuals or whatever.
From storytelling perspective,
yeah,
stories are agnostic. It doesn't matter what industry or background or relevance anybody has come from.
Yeah,
stories are agnostic, so you can still weave and factor in a compelling story, regardless of whether it's in engineering or software or retail or car sales. It's irrelevant. Storytelling is relevant for every single industry. It doesn't matter whether if they say that it doesn't work like that in their industry, then they just need to open up a little bit, and that's our skill.
They've never tried it.
We do, yeah, exactly.
They've never tried it. Agreed.
fair.
Okay, so interesting statistics. We've only got an hour for today's event. Storytelling is critical. It's important. The responsibility of all salespeople is to only bring two things to the table: honesty and integrity. Honesty and integrity build trust. Everything else is a game. Sales is a sport. Learn the art of that sport that you're in, the discipline that you're in. Learn it well. Master your craft. It's highly disciplined, it is highly professional, and it is highly, highly skilled. Give yourselves a pat on the back to know what these things are. All right. That's the really important part. Leverage your storytelling capability. For those salespeople out there that deal in facts and figures only, you're missing a golden opportunity. All right. Broaden your skills, broaden your horizons, and understand how to leverage those stories to best effect. You always have to balance the line. You can't scare people, you can't put them off and all the rest of it, but you've got to deliver some home truths, and you can best deliver those home truths when you are elaborating others' stories. As Graham rightly said, when you've got the testimonials, when you've got the stories of other people of how you've solved like-minded issues. Learn a bit about psychometric profiling. Be more articulate about how you do problem-solving methodology, whether it's spin specifics or any other model of your choice. Get to know some of your basis and understandings when it comes to neuroscience, and understand the basics of what that means when you're painting pictures for people, what pictures land, don't land, etc. And ask. And finally, I would say, one of my favorite ones always, because we do this a lot when we're teaching sales and sales negotiation, don't underestimate the value of silence. It's a powerful tool, even in storytelling. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. That was today's session, just talking a bit about storytelling. There's lots of stuff that we tend to do as we go through the year. So you can reach out to Graham if you want. You can reach out to Darren. You can reach out to Matt. Their details are on there. We've got more events coming up later on this year and more coming up into next year as well. So I hope you'll join us for a few more of those things as well. But on behalf of Graham, do you want to wave?
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Darren and Matt, do you want to wave? Say goodbye. It's been emotional. Thank you very much, everyone. If I can ask my guests just to stay on the call, and we'll see you for the next live stream. Thanks very much.